Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to call this public caucus to order. Tonight we have Adrian Vicari, a professional engineer from Herbert, Rowland & Grubik, and Mark Spatz, a professional engineer from Herbert, Rowland & Grubik, with us to present their findings from the feasibility study regarding the Lackawanna Regional Stormwater Initiative. We also have Larry West, who is the city's business administrator, to offer some comment as well. So I'll turn it over to you to present these findings, and then we'll take questions, any questions from council. Thank you.
Good evening, council. Before we get started with the presentation, I just make a couple of notes here. First off, I'd like to thank the folks from HRG. They've been working on this project for a couple of years now. I'm no stranger to them, working for Senator Blake's office, navigating some of these proposals over the last couple of years. So grateful that they got it wrapped up and they've done some good work. So I'm looking forward to the presentation. City business, real quick. I just want to let council know that last week I met with Councilman Gaughan and Councilman Donahue up at Leggett's Creek and Leech Creek. We had an issue with DEP with some of the flooding. As you know, we were on site. Today, DEP was in City Hall. They had issued us 2 emergency permits to begin work. They're both maximum 60-day emergency permits. One is to work on Leech Creek. It's about a 300-foot section from the outfall at Market Street to the confluence at Leggett's Creek. That work is just the stream bed, kind of rebuilding back what had washed out from May 4th and doing some repairs on the sides. And the second emergency permit is for the eastern side of Rockwell in Leggett's Creek to remove some trees and debris. So to the point that these issues are front and center with us, and it's very timely that HRG is here today to talk about stormwater. But I just want to let council know that both those permits were issued today. They're both maximum 60-day permits. So that's all I have regarding that. So I'll turn it over to HRG. I'm not sure which one's going first, but.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to be with you this evening. We're really excited to share with you some of the vision, the findings, and the financial analysis that we completed relative to the regional stormwater feasibility study. It's something that Mark and I have been working with the city on since 2019, I want to say. We got hired to work with you on 2 items. One was the pollution reduction plan. That's the effort that Mark led up, and that's part of a permit that the city has for storm systems. It's called your MS4 permit. It stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. So any municipality in the Chesapeake Bay that has urbanized area has an MS4 permit, and as part of that permit, you needed to do a pollution reduction plan, and that looked at where you're going to put green infrastructure projects, things like stream restoration or infiltration beds to infiltrate stormwater, and that's a requirement of this permit term. So we started working with you on looking at where you're going to put those BMPs currently to meet your permit obligations, and then also started working on a study to look at if a regional form of stormwater management was both feasible and made financial sense for the city and surrounding municipalities. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, not necessarily. I just want to quickly touch on just a little bit of background on the MS4 program and just, what are we talking about when we're talking about that program? You're going to hear words like BMPs. They're called best management practices. It's really just a coined term for trying to describe like infrastructure projects. So I think the best analogy for the MS4 program is kind of the sewer, if you look at how a sewer evolved. Back in the 30s, cities and municipalities would just discharge sewer in pipes directly to the creeks and rivers. There was no treatment. That's why you have these combined systems, right? The road drainage would go into the pipe. You discharge the sewage from the building into the pipe, that would go out to the creek. Why wouldn't you use the same pipe? It's going to the same place, makes a lot of sense. As the population grew, of course, there was more pollution to the creeks and the rivers, and we kind of figured out that, hey, we need to treat the sewer part of it. So we started splitting that up and installing wastewater treatment plants, right? So if you can think of a wastewater treatment plant as kind of a BMP, that's a very general term, this BMP, and it's used to clean up the sewer part before it discharges the cleaned water into the creeks and rivers. The MS4 program is very similar to that for stormwater. So, we're actually in, 50 years of sewer treatment plants. Sewage treatment plants have been around for a long time, since the 60s. And we're realizing that, that was a step in the right direction, but it's just not enough. A quarter of the streams in Pennsylvania are impaired because of stormwater runoff. So if you think of all the streams, take a quarter of the state, that's a big chunk, and say a quarter of that is impaired for fish, wildlife, there's pollutants in it, so on and so forth. So the MS4 program is gauged to take that next step and saying, hey, we got to do a little bit more as a community across the entire state and multiple states. Maryland's doing the same thing, New York, New Jersey, to clean up the streams and rivers a little bit more. To do that, we have to take the stormwater, put it through these BMPs. They're not big wastewater treatment plants like we have for sewer, but they're things like rain gardens. It's really just taking stormwater and getting it through grassy areas. There's all kinds of engineering things you can do, but it's a lot less tanks and mechanical things. It's more trying to get the rainwater to run through more of a natural environment, grasses along mulched areas, things of that nature. So that's what the MS4 program is about. But obviously, to make infrastructure changes, that takes money. So we were trying to, you have a permit in place, and their study is to try to say, okay, this permit that's now in place, requires BMPs to be installed, infrastructure projects. How are we going to finance that? How's that going to happen over the next 5-year period? And there's more things after that, but we're really just looking at the next 5-year window. Is there any questions on just the broad range of MS4 and what the big objectives are of any programs that we can address?
Any questions?
No, just we're going to treat all the water now instead of that.
What's that?
It's going to treat all the water now instead of some of it.
Yeah, instead of just treating sewer, it's going to be treating also stormwater. And again, it's a permit requirement. There's a lot more depth to it than that high level picture, because there's actually orders between Maryland and Pennsylvania, so there's a lot of teeth to this thing. But in the long story short, that's what we're trying to clean. And multiple municipalities are doing it. The neighbors to the south or southwest are doing it as well, all the way down the Susquehanna River, and other riversheds and water basins as well are working on it in Pennsylvania.
So if we're going to, how do we share the responsibility with the bordering states that we might have the same water?
Yeah, so each state has their own requirements. Within Pennsylvania, they have, this program, what we're going to talk about today is not so much partnering with other states, but it's partnering with municipalities around the city and seeing how we can do that kind of as a regional effort.
But in a way,
Hold on.
Pennsylvania partnered with the surrounding states as part of the Chesapeake Bay Agreement that was signed in 1983. And the reason why these MS4 requirements are now in your permit and the permits of the surrounding municipalities is part of that agreement. So Pennsylvania made agreement with the neighboring states. The neighboring states required their municipalities to do things to improve their waterways, and actually Pennsylvania is behind in compliance. So there's the extra pressure now of there's a deadline coming up in 2025 where all the states were supposed to meet what they agreed to do, and so there's actually a lot of speculation if Pennsylvania and its municipalities are actually gonna meet what was agreed upon in the agreement. Just to give you a little bit more information about Herbert, Rowland, and Grubik, or HRG, we're very fortunate to be named by ENR Engineering News Record as the 2021 Mid-Atlantic Design Firm of the Year. So we're very honored by that designation. We've been providing engineering and related services to municipalities throughout Pennsylvania for over 60 years. We serve as a top retained engineer in Pennsylvania for municipalities and municipal authorities. So we have more retained municipalities and authorities. And we've been able to work together on regional stormwater solutions benefiting over 170 municipalities in Pennsylvania. So this is really getting a lot more traction. And we've worked on like stormwater fees and other new funding solutions for municipalities throughout the Commonwealth as well. So, before we jump into our analysis, we just wanted to take a moment to discuss why new solutions for stormwater management are necessary. And, there's a lot of stormwater issues and challenges that the Lackawanna Valley region is facing, along with, other municipalities throughout the state as well. So the first one is one that Mark already touched upon before. It's polluted streams. So, we're seeing that there's a number of streams in the Lackawanna Valley that are considered impaired, so they're not meeting their designated uses, and we're seeing the impacts of sediment pollution and acid mine drainage in those streams. At the same time, we've seen that, with COVID, property owners really wanted to get back outside and get, in touch with nature. And so there's been this kind of renewed sense of the public of engaging in recreational activities, and there's an overall increased desire on preserving and protecting the environment. So, we're seeing that preserved environments are becoming key to attracting economic development and to ensuring that communities are places where people live, work, and play, for decades to come. So there's kind of this renewed desire to ensure that local environments are sustainable and inviting. Another challenge, also Mark mentioned, is the tightening DEP and EPA regulation. So now municipalities in the Chesapeake Bay watershed with MS4 permits, now you actually need to go and implement those infrastructure solutions, the green infrastructure that we were talking about, to start cleaning up the stormwater. This is the first time that these have found their way into municipal permits. So for the first time, you actually have to be installing this green infrastructure to meet permit requirements. And there's some significant cost associated with those. There's 22 municipalities surrounding Scranton, or 21 other municipalities surrounding Scranton that have similar requirements. And DEP is intending for these requirements to continue in future permit rounds. So MS4 permits run in 5-year permit cycles. So, you have to do these projects, you have 5 years to get them completed. But DEP is intending for the next permit cycle that there's going to be additional projects, and they're intending for those to continue until the impairments are eliminated in the stream. So they're not going away anytime soon. We're seeing in a lot of cases municipalities don't have sufficient tax revenue to maintain the stormwater infrastructure they already have. Now on top of it, we're seeing the renewed need to make improvements to meet environmental regulation. We're also seeing increased flooding events due to higher intensity storms. The stormwater systems just don't have the capacity. And all of that comes down to, the fact that in most municipalities, tax revenue is remaining stable from year to year. So we're seeing cost of stormwater increase, and what's the solution? And so what we're seeing in that is really similar to what we saw back in the water and wastewater sectors for the 1970s. So, Mark talked a little bit about wastewater treatment and how things kind of progressed over the decades. Well, what we saw in the 60s and 70s is DEP started requiring treatment facilities to provide secondary treatment, so advanced treatment than what it was providing before. And at that time, the cost of meeting environmental regulation, it got to a point that municipalities said, we can no longer provide wastewater service funded by tax revenue. And at that point, we started to see municipal authorities being formed, and we start seeing people paying sewer fees, wastewater fees. I can't think of any municipality in Pennsylvania right now that's getting public wastewater treatment and the homeowners aren't paying a fee for service, right? So fast forward, we're at a really similar place now with stormwater. So regulation is tightening. Municipalities are saying, we can't fund this out of tax revenue. And we're seeing them come up with new solutions and forming more authorities, stormwater authorities, in order to be able to fund this. And so what we've seen now is there's over 1,800 stormwater utilities throughout the nation. Enabling legislation was passed in 2013 to allow municipalities to use municipal authorities for stormwater management and for fees to be formed. And I would say, we've seen consistent implementation of stormwater utilities in Pennsylvania over the last 5 years. I know personally I've been able to help support stormwater utilities benefiting 50 municipalities in just the last 3 or 4 years. So year over year, we're kind of seeing a doubling of that. We've also seen with COVID that more regional programs are being formed. So for instance, Dauphin County in Harrisburg, during COVID, the county decided, hey, we're seeing what COVID is doing to our municipalities, reduce tax revenue. We're going to streamline those costs and develop a countywide program that municipalities can opt into. And that way they can, they don't have to bear the burden of these new MS4 costs alone. The county's gonna come in and create a regional solution to cut the cost for everyone involved. So back in 2019, we started working with the city on the concept of a regional stormwater solution. And what we did is we sent out surveys to the 22 municipalities with MS4 permits. And so you can see on the map here, these are the communities that received the surveys, and 17 of them responded.
Just jump in here. When you look at this map, one item you see on there is the different municipalities, and then we highlighted the area that's Scranton, Carbondale, and the Abington area, just for basis of reference. There's a dark area. It's not quite orange on your map. It is on that screen over there, but on the projector, it just looks like that burnt area. You can see maybe, I would get up, but I know the microphone's here. There's some red lines. They don't look exactly red on there, so excuse me for that. But there's some red lines going through kind of the valley area, and there's some blue lines outside of it. The red lines are all impaired streams. So you can see there's a lot of impaired streams within the valley area. So this is, you know, this is stuff that hits home. The other part of it is all the kind of the orange area there, the burnt area. That's the urbanized area boundary. So any of the municipalities that have some of that orange area in it, they also have MS4 permits. So that's kind of the people or the municipalities that, to some extent, they're feeling the same things that the city's feeling. You're kind of all in this together. Each municipality has a permit there. So you can see the ones we outlined there are the ones in the urbanized area. There is other municipalities outside that, obviously within the county as well, that don't have urbanized areas, so they don't have MS4 permits. So it's kind of the valley cities in the Abington area up to Carbondale.
So in terms of some of the just general results of the survey, we saw that municipalities are willing to give up control over stormwater if a regional cooperation was seen to be more effective and efficient than working alone. They saw a need to increase funding, and they were interested in a new funding source being developed that would be dedicated just to water resource improvement, so just to stormwater needs. They were also interested in receiving money back from a regional fee that they could use to fund maintenance of locally owned infrastructure. And you can see on the slide, 100% of the municipalities said they could use the most support for funding to improve existing stormwater infrastructure. So basically just to keep the infrastructure that they already have in good working order. They also said that they could use help with sediment and nutrient reduction. That's the green infrastructure that's required as part of the permit round. Help with just administering the permits. There's a myriad of day-to-day things that need to be done by the municipalities. They're also interested in doing regional flood projects, so working together to reduce flooding. This shows some other results of the surveys. Basically, we said, which type of regional services would you be interested in receiving for stormwater? And you can really see that this list covers a wide variety of things. So we see regulatory compliance, we see mapping of stormwater infrastructure, engineering services, street sweeping, replacing existing stormwater infrastructure, capital projects, responding to citizens' concerns, stormwater infrastructure maintenance, so just day-to-day maintenance of infrastructure, and capital projects for flood mitigation. And you can see for all of those were things that almost all of the respondents said that they were interested in working together with surrounding municipalities on. And so, let me go back a slide. And so, besides the municipality saying, hey, we are interested in working together, why else would you as a city be interested in working with the municipalities? Well, what we see is, stormwater rarely follows municipal borders. And, typically when a municipality deals with stormwater issues or flooding issues, they don't necessarily originate within that municipality. Lots of times it's stormwater that's flowing in for another municipality, and what we see is when you just deal with stormwater on a per municipal approach, you're kind of band-aiding situations. Maybe you're dealing with the downstream effects of stormwater and trying to rehabilitate that, but you're not able to deal with the upstream effects that's actually causing the problem, to take place. When we can move outside municipal borders and deal with it on a watershed basis, we can implement holistic solutions that wind up costing less. The MS4 permits we've been talking about, they require the installation of green infrastructure projects to reduce sediment pollution by 10%. Well, the hard part is finding green open spaces that are publicly owned where these projects can be done. And lots of times when a municipality is looking at the available land they have, based upon what they have, they wind up having to do more expensive projects. But when you can work together, when you're in an agreement with surrounding municipalities, DEP will let you put those BMPs anywhere in the watershed. And when we can do that, then we can put the most cost-effective BMPs. So the BMPs where we get the greatest pollution reduction for the lowest cost. The other thing that we can do is we can be more thoughtful in where we're putting those BMPs. So if we know flooding is an issue, we can put BMPs in areas to help reduce flooding. Those BMPs, they're designed to infiltrate stormwater. That's what they're designed to do. So if we can be infiltrating the stormwater in the right areas, we're meeting MS4 permit requirements while at the same time helping to relieve flooding issues. So kind of a win-win solution. Also, as we go into the future, DEP is looking to put additional requirements into permits. So right now, as a MS4 permanent municipality, you need to do BMPs for sediment reduction. At the same time, Lackawanna County is working on a countywide action plan. That countywide action plan basically says, okay, Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania has put goals on you for nitrogen and phosphorus reduction. And so the county is looking at where to put BMPs in order to meet those goals. And those BMPs wind up getting placed typically in rural areas. But what DEP is saying is, over the course of the next 10 to 20 years, MS4 permits and this countywide action plan, those are likely going to align. And so those requirements are going to become part of everyone's permits. And when that happens, it's not going to be feasible for the city of Scranton to actually meet those permit requirements without working with your neighbors, because you don't have the available land to put in BMPs that are able to meet the nitrogen reduction goals. So it requires being in agreement with other municipalities to work together. So kind of putting the survey results and combining that with some of the benefits that we know exist, we came up with kind of a recommendation for initial programming if a regional authority were to be developed. And so this kind of goes down through the list. It shows some of our recommendations. The first would be for the municipalities to work together on regulatory requirements. So working on a joint MS4 permit between the county and the municipalities to achieve the pollution reduction requirements, working together to complete mapping of existing infrastructure and administering the permit. And that includes implementing green infrastructure projects and doing some other day-to-day requirements of the permit. We call those minimum control measures. And then also working together with existing infrastructure maintenance, so street sweeping, reviewing stormwater development plans, and in the long run, this regional entity could also take over ownership of existing stormwater infrastructure, if that was in the long-term interest of the municipalities. Then there's also the opportunity for this regional program to take over levee infrastructure ownership and maintenance and do capital projects for flood mitigation. Then also the funding component of this program. So how are we going to fund all these items? There's the option for a county stormwater fee, or a fee from a regional program. And we're going to show in the presentation today what that would actually look like and how it would impact property owners in the community. So what this does is, what I just described is part of phase 1 on the slide. Phase 2 is something that would happen in the future, potentially maybe a following permit cycle. So again, 5 years from now. And the additional items that could be done and taking it on regionally are shown in bolded text. So it could be, actually doing improvements to the levee infrastructure, doing regional flood projects, O&M of existing stormwater infrastructure, replacing stormwater infrastructure in each of the communities, and helping to meet new regulatory requirements. So as part of the study, we did a business plan. And what we looked at is if those items were to be done regionally over the course of 20 years, what do we think that it would cost? And we compared it if each municipality did it separately versus if they did it together as part of a regional solution. So you can see 4 of the municipalities that we tested are shown up on the slide. City 1 being the city of Scranton. So we projected if you were going to do everything alone over the next 20 years, the total estimated capital cost you would spend would be $8 million. And you'd spend about $1.4 million a year to meet the annual operation and maintenance requirements of the system. And if we look at that in terms of a 20-year present worth analysis, we're looking at about $28 million that would go towards stormwater management. If we compare that to doing things regionally, it would cost the city about $5.2 million in capital cost, $1.1 million in annual operation and maintenance cost, and that leads us to about $21 million over 20 years. So that gives us a present worth savings of about $7 million, which is 24% of the cost by working together. And you can see with the other municipalities shown up here that the savings go up for a lot of the municipalities. We say between 43 and 64%. And one thing's really important to mention, we show a 24% cost savings for the city, but as I mentioned before, assuming that nitrogen and phosphorus reduction requirements get put into your permit in the future, it actually wouldn't be feasible for you to do it, separately. So Mark and I talked a lot. We're like, how do we show infeasible in terms of a cost savings? So really, it would wind up being more than 24% because you would need to find a way to, to meet requirements when really there's no easy solution right now.
I have a question. I'm sorry if this is in the other slides in your presentation. How is the fee calculated? Is it based on how much impervious surface a property owner has, or can you explain that?
Sure, yes. So there is another slide that goes into a little bit more detail about the fee. But yeah, we looked at impervious area estimates, throughout the Lackawanna Valley, and DEP has developed those estimates. So using those estimates and looking at the full cost of the program projected over 20 years, we looked at what a stormwater fee would be necessary in order to fully fund the program. So the feasibility study, it looked at, who could be the ones to actually implement this program and drive it forward. And we looked at existing regional sewer authorities. We looked at COGS and other entities, and we determined that a new regional or county level authority might be the best solution to implement the program. Now, we determined that it would be challenging to expand some of the existing regional sewer authorities that are there due to either the service area or representation or just their lack of interest in getting involved in stormwater management. If we were to go and implement a new authority, it would allow for municipalities to opt in now that wanted to be part of the program. It would also allow, as DEP regulations tightened and we saw regulation put on more of the rural municipalities, we would see the ability for them to opt in to the program at a later date. And the goal is it would provide that urbanized and ag kind of urbanized and rural partnership between municipalities to meet some of these 10 to 20-year regulatory responsibilities that we see coming down. It would also provide options for funding either through a fee or through a cost share formula. So municipalities could either come up with the cost on their own and provide it back as part of a cost share formula, or a fee could be charged to homeowners. Most municipalities don't have the legal ability to implement a fee on their own without the use of a municipal authority. If it was done at the county level, it might be beneficial in the long term because we'd be able to take advantage of the existing county structure. So the program could provide revenue back to both the county and the city for use of existing county and city staff to help manage some of the day-to-day functions of the authority. DEP may also require the county to enter into a joint permit with the municipalities in the future. And so this gives the municipalities and the counties time to develop that program in advance of it actually being a regulatory requirement. And we also might see just the use of a county authority being politically favorable to some of the municipalities as well, just because they have existing relationship with the county. They vote for the county commissioners and so forth. So getting more into the fee structure. So again, as part of that business plan model, we looked at the proposed list of services. We determined what it would most likely cost the average residential property owner if this was implemented. What you see here is you see a range in fees. And part of that reason is because we just used DEP's estimates of impervious surface. And we've seen throughout the country, impervious surface is the typical way that stormwater costs are allocated. And that's because empirical studies have shown that impervious surface is the best correlation to the rate and volume of stormwater leaving a property or the quality of stormwater leaving a property. And so I want to say on average about 90% of stormwater utilities across the nation will allocate cost to property owners based upon impervious area. So here you can see we looked at an initial monthly base fee that ranged between $4.50 and $6 a month. Now that assumed that of that $4.50, $1 was going back to each municipality per customer to go towards existing infrastructure maintenance. So the real cost of providing the regional services is ranging from $3.50 to $5. Adding in some money back to the municipalities for existing stormwater infrastructure takes it from $4.50 to $6. If the regional program were also going to take over levee maintenance, then we looked at an additional fee going onto those property owners where the municipalities have levee infrastructure, and that additional cost would be between 30 cents and 50 cents a month. So we see for municipalities with levies, the average cost to a residential property owner would be between $4.80 and $6.50.
Are there ways I think I remember reading this once, that a homeowner can get a credit back if they were to do some sort of project on their own?
Yeah, definitely. So in order to ensure that a fee meets the test of being a fee and not a tax, and that it also meets the requirements of the Municipality Authorities Act, it's really important to have a credit policy. And that's just what you said. Homeowners can do projects, can do things on their property to manage their stormwater. When they do that, that's reducing the cost of the program. And so that savings is given back to them in a reduction of a fee. So typically we see credits range anywhere from 10% to 50%, fee reduction. I've seen in the communities I've worked with, it's a really great way to create collaboration. So right now, meeting your MS4 permit requirements, it's basically on the city, to get them met. You have the permit, you're dealing with it on your own. When you charge a fee and you have a credit policy, then you're incentivizing property owners to get involved. And we've seen it really become a collaborative approach in the municipalities that have implemented a stormwater fee, especially getting developers, to get involved.
It definitely spurs interest because, for businesses, developers, they're in the business of being in business. And if you want to talk to them about cleaning stormwater up for the city, that's not the business they're in. But if you're broaching the subject of, hey, there's a way to save us money, which will save you money, because we're looking at fee structure, it brings them to the table. So then you can have some good, it's really prospered in a lot of good relationships in many scenarios, because they have land and they have assets, and the city, most municipalities are not in the business of trying to have a lot of land, because then you don't get tax revenue from it. So you're trying not to have a lot of land, where other partners within the area, it's kind of the opposite. Their business model might be a different model thing.
I have a quick question. So what would be an example of something you would do on your property to get credit or reduce the fee?
Sure. So,
like collecting rainwater and using it, or I don't know.
Yeah, so, so sometimes rain barrels will be a
Right,
solution.
okay.
So if a property owner wants to install a rain barrel, they're catching the rainwater and then they're using it to irrigate their property. So that could be an example. Or, something like a rain garden, where you're taking the rainwater, coming off your gutters, and you're directing it into a garden where you have vegetation. And that's going to help the rainwater infiltrate into the soil, and it's going to help that vegetation uptake the nutrients. So that would be another example. So as we look at, this option of funding through a fee, it kind of raises the question, well, is it better to charge a fee for stormwater, or would it be better if there was a cost share, and each municipality just, basically used tax revenue to come up with their portion of the cost to work together regionally. So what this slide does is it looks at the impact to an average residential property owner if they were to pay these increased cost of stormwater through taxes or through a stormwater fee. So again, city number one is Scranton. So, we see here a total annual stormwater revenue need of about $1.8 million to meet stormwater requirements. We looked at what your current millage is and what the millage would need to be in order to come up with this money. And we compare that to the median residential property value to look at what that would actually amount to in an increased tax payment. And so you can see, median annual residential tax payment related to stormwater, $300 a year. And then we compared that to the fee on the last slide. So the base fee of the program plus the fee for the levy. So, $4.80, per month. And, so we looked at an estimated annual stormwater fee being $60 to the average resident. So we're showing the cost savings from a fee being 80%. So the average residential homeowner is going to save 80% by paying a fee for stormwater as opposed to paying it through taxes. And some of the reasons why that's so great is with a fee, everyone pays. Nonprofits would pay a fee where they don't pay through taxes. In addition, when you're paying based upon impervious area, we're also seeing that paying an impervious area as opposed to taxes where it's based upon your assessed property value. That really shifts a lot of the cost and makes it more equitable, based upon who's really generating the stormwater to be managed.
And you lose some intrinsic partnerships like we just talked about, because through a tax revenue, it's kind of more of the same, right? People aren't looking for credit policies, ways that they can do some infrastructure. Mostly, it really comes down to larger businesses with larger impervious surfaces. Those are the ones that are really interested in, entering into partnerships with a regional program or a city program, whichever the way, a county program, to save, because they're a business, and saving money is what is makes sense for their business. With a fee structure, there's an incentive to bring people to the table, to get some partners in the program, or a tax millage basis. It just doesn't get that incentive, and there's a lot of value. What we see is there's a lot of value, a lot of partnerships that can be built and continue to build over the years. It just kind of aligns both sides to the same goal, whereas in a tax structure, it's not as aligned.
Yeah. Another thing that besides just seeing the collaboration to bring costs down, another thing that we see with regional approaches is they're receiving a lot more grant funding from the federal government, from the state government, from county governments. We've seen with other regional approaches for stormwater, WVSA, for instance, they have the opportunity for the majority of their BMP cost to be paid for through grants this year. And it's pretty staggering if they were to actually receive the grant money that they're working on pulling in right now. They're looking at $28 million this year to cover BMP costs. So that's a really big cost savings, and they know if the municipalities were each doing it on their own, there's no way that they would have been able to bring that much funding into each municipality to cover stormwater costs. So I know we talked about stormwater fees, but if that isn't politically favorable, there's also the option to do a cost share funding mechanism. This is what Dauphin County is looking to do. So if that were to happen, then program cost would be allocated to each municipality based upon the benefits that each municipality receives. We looked at having a base fee per municipality of about $32,000 a year. That would cover a fixed cost of the program. And then there'd be an additional fee based upon how much impervious area is located in each municipality, the number of urbanized acres, non-urbanized acres, miles of roadway, and miles of levee infrastructure. And so you can see here what that looks like in terms of how those costs would get allocated to municipalities, what's on the slide. Besides costing residents more, we saw on that last slide, if we did a cost share, that it was going to cost residents significantly more. The other downside is that each municipality needs to come up with the total funds. So if we were to fund a program through a fee would be charged to property owners. The cost of stormwater management would be taken out of the general fund budgets. It would create a positive cash flow in the general fund. With a cost share formula, municipalities have to come up with the revenue to pay into that pool. So they either have to raise taxes or they each need to implement a fee of their own. So then kind of just to wrap up, why is this something that makes sense for us to be talking about now? Well, we know MS4 is an unfunded mandate. Municipalities are behind in compliance. Specifically some of those municipalities that were part of the 17 that submitted survey results back to us. Some of those are critically behind in compliance and are potentially facing enforcement action from DEP. We've also, seen, COVID has impacted municipal tax revenue. That's become, a challenge, for municipalities. And, we know that our regional stormwater program would cut the majority of those stormwater costs out of the municipal budgets. We also know funding through a fee in place of taxes is going to save the residents money. And, I mentioned before how regional entities are showing an increased ability to pull in grant contributions to fund projects. And, we're seeing more and more programs come about for grants that are focusing on regional initiatives, green infrastructure, and permit compliance needs, along with shovel-ready projects.
I have a quick question. So,
Yeah.
Of course, it's another unfortunate unfunded mandate that burdens the taxpayers. But what about, what are your thoughts on Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan? Because there's made mention, I know it's not passed yet, but there's made mention of stormwater management. So how would that play into this if something came that way?
I think that money could be really impactful in getting a regional program like this up and going. Because there's cost to get the program going, and then there's also the cost of the infrastructure, projects. And, we're seeing with other large regional entities, they've set the fees, say they set the fees at $5. They've been able to pull in the grant funding. Now they're able to actually go in and reduce the fees. Just with what they've been able to receive this last year with some of the COVID money coming into play. So honestly, I think this is the perfect timing in order to come together as a region and be able to go after some of that Biden infrastructure money, because it could be a really good opportunity to start solving some of the critical flooding issues along with meeting permit compliance.
The big thing to recognize too is when you get infusions like that, or the COVID relief funds and things like that, they're assistance to either catch up or fill gaps and holes, but they're not long-term funding, right? So just like water, the requirement to treat wastewater that started in the 60s never went away. This is the son of the same thing. So you have to have local, sustainable mechanism for that. Now, obviously, if you get infusions from different grant programs like WVSA, you can be more aggressive with that. That just helps to suppress your fees as much as possible, and that's where bigger entities have more success, because honestly, it's serving more constituencies
Sure.
at all different levels, so it just gets more attention.
Thanks.
So while we're talking about that regional scale, have all the municipalities in Lackawanna County opted into this?
No, they haven't. So basically, we did the survey at the beginning, and we said, if a regional program was to be done, would you be interested? And what types of services would you want it to offer? What type of services would make you want to be part of the program? And so we used those results, to craft this. And now where we're at in terms of our work is we've developed the draft feasibility plan, and we have some copies with you tonight if you're interested. I think everyone got the executive summary, which is one of the handouts that we set out for you. With that work, we kind of wanted to take any feedback that you have and along with feedback from staff, and finalize the plan. And then that step of our scope is done. But I think the critical next steps is continued discussion with the municipalities, and also discussions with the county commissioners, just to talk about, if we were going to do this, other municipalities, are you in, and how are we actually going to make, this happen. Also talking to DEP and working with them to discuss the concept of a joint permit for this group of municipalities. And then, following that, there would be, some initial implementation steps, working with your legal counsel to look at authority structure, looking at drafting intermunicipal agreements with the municipalities to work together to set up the structure, and then getting the legislators on board to support this, and then again monitoring those federal and state funding opportunities, like you said, coming through Biden in order to get the program started.
So with that being said, do we have an estimate or a percentage of how many municipalities have opted into this to try to do regional or interested in doing regional?
So we surveyed 22 municipalities, and of that we had 17 responses. Of those, at least 14, I would say, said yes, but that was before they saw any of the cost savings. We've done this in other areas where we've surveyed the municipalities, and we said, how much of a cost savings would you need to see in order to opt into a regional program like this? And typically it's 30%. Typically they want to see 30% to actually move forward. And as you could see on one of the slides we presented, the cost savings that we're showing for the municipalities, besides Scranton, all exceed that number. So I think those are pretty good results.
With that, are all of the municipalities mandated or need to comply with this? Each one does? Scranton does.
Yeah, on that map, it's on your PowerPoint you have handed out there, that burnt orange area, any one of the municipalities that has that. And I think there's 22. There's 22 total.
But
So when we're
each
talking
has
about
to
like
comply
14,
with
that's out of
whether
22.
Each has to comply whether it's together or alone.
Correct.
Is it feasible for any of the municipalities to opt out based on their demographic, size, anything like that?
No, there's no opt out at this point.
I guess when I mean opt out, I mean to go it alone.
Yeah, they can go it alone. Yeah, this is a one step at a time. And the first step was, what would this look like? That's what this plan is to articulate. What would the business plan look at? The next part is, okay, relationships, getting together, municipalities kind of taking the steps. Do they want to partner to do this? Does county want to partner and do this? Things of that nature.
So thank you. I'm sorry for the lengthy answers here, but Tom, to answer your question, we started this several years ago. Those municipalities that did come in, that they had surveyed, there was some real interest. I had spoken to several of the DPW directors and councilmen and mayors up and down the valley that had some real interest in having this conversation. I don't think it's any secret. It's been all over the paper. Dixon City's having some issues up there. Obviously, we always have flooding issues here in the Pine Brook area and other parts of our community. So I think this discussion is it's good timing. I appreciate HRG and their professionalism in coming in here, and I know that they're available for any questions that we might have moving forward. So, and I avail myself as well to anything you might have. So if you have anything for us now, if not, I know you guys have a meeting tonight, so.
I just have one question quickly. So if this were to be set up under the county umbrella, so to say, would it have to include contiguous communities, or could it be sort of all over the map? So would, for example, for Scranton, Archbald, and Carbondale to, get into an authority, would Dixon City, Oliphant have to join it to connect that continuous?
They wouldn't have to be contiguous. In order to
Okay.
come together to do BMPs, they would need to be in the same watershed. But, what DEP has said is, over time, they're probably going to switch from, or being an urbanized municipality, being the defining factor if you have an MS4 permit, to based upon specific land use codes. And if you have developed property in your municipality, then you come under MS4 compliance. So it's likely, if a regional entity would form, that over time, there'd be more municipalities that were going to opt in as they started coming under new regulation.
But would that leave somebody out that might want to opt in if, some of the communities in between, I guess, aren't touching each other, I guess you would say? No? Okay.
Any other questions? I just have one final one. I know we're over time. Just to clarify, this, if the city did nothing, what would happen in terms of not being in compliance? Is there a fine from DEP? There's some misinformation out there that, the rain tax, stop the rain tax, but ultimately, all of us sitting here, regardless of all that, what happens if we do nothing?
You would get permit violation notice, and then if that would be ignored, you could receive up to a $10,000 per day fine until you become into compliance. Now that is the sledgehammer from the department. There can be a lesser, but sometimes there was one thing I do like to correct is sometimes people think, well, we'll just pay the fine and not comply. It's like, no. You keep paying the fine until you comply. So you also receive the cost of compliance plus the fine fees until you get to that point. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen in one day, but that's ultimately the sledgehammer that they do have.
And then in terms of timeline, right now, can you explain the window for the current MS4 permit, when that runs out, and when all of this, we have to get all this done to be in compliance?
Yeah, so the time frame is a 5-year window after your permit is issued. There's some municipalities within the area that are general permits. They're actually already in their permits, and they're required to be in compliance by the end March of 2023. So it's coming up real quick for them. So we're looking that through the collaborative effort, if they come on board, we could put everybody under a single permit and extend that out to 2028 for everybody. So that's kind of a little bit of a carrot that I think we're trying to incentivize and say, hey, we can get a little bit more time. There's actually a timeline chart on the back of your executive summary. So the executive summary part is just, trying to take this whole document down and get it to the really brief key things. If you look on the back here at the very top, so the bottom is the current general permits for some of the municipalities. About half of the 21 are under the general permits, the other half are individual, so those are a little different. So half of the municipalities, and if we would all come together, there would be this top timeline here. You can see you get the permits issued within the next year, but then all those BMPs need to be in place, and all the infrastructure of running the authority and all that kind of stuff would need to be in place, and operational BMPs all installed, all the construction done by the end of 2028.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank you both for being here and for all the work you put into the presentation. It's very well done. And we look forward to continuing to work with you, and thank Mr. West for being here and answering questions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll take a 5-minute recess, and then we'll start our regular meeting.